Welcome, welcome. Happy New Year, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is our second artist panel discussion of the year, and we had such a blast with the first one that we decided to do another, but we asked our artists to actually stay home because the acoustics in the gallery are like a big, huge cave. But welcome, welcome. Thanks for being here. Tomorrow, the current exhibition, Begin Again, closes at 5 p.m. So you still have time to run over here and see this amazing show. We wanted to hear tonight from the artist who created this amazing exhibit and a little bit about their insight into their work. So Caprice Pierucci, Laura Guese, Anthony Holmquist, Liz Quan, and Kevin Hoth are all on the phone. Wanted to thank Eliza Ross for her coordination of tonight's panel and the technical execution. And I wanted to thank and introduce our moderator for the evening, Libby Garon, our gallery manager. So welcome, thank you for joining us. And at the end, we will have time for questions. If you want to put your question in the chat, that would be great. And we'll have 10 minutes that you can speak with the artist directly. So take it away, Libby.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. So what I'm going to start with is actually the exhibition statement because I think it sets a really wonderful tone for the discussion and sets a tone for the work that you'll see on the screen tonight. So the turn of a new decade brought with it an intersectional crossroads unable to be ignored. We are on the cusp of change. How can we do better? As society shifts, as does the art world. These 5 artists featured in Begin Again are inspired by healing, hope, and wonder, aesthetically working within the realms of ripples and repetition to convey their messages in an array of mediums. We aspire to invoke a sense of thoughtful reflection so as to begin again with positive action. So what a perfect way to start 2021 with this positive intent of healing and beginning again. So what I first wanted to start off with is the question this was actually raised by Liz. So part of what we're doing tonight is the artist provided the questions for each other, and I'm more kind of facilitating who's answering what. So as artists have ideas and want to interject, please do so. But initially, the first question is, what is the process of creating your work? How does the technical aspects of making this work hinder, inform, or raise the level of the work? And I'm gonna first turn it over to Mr. Tony, who is an incredible printmaker, and process is a big part of what he does. And I'd love to hear more about that from you, Tony.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, and thank you for the question. As Libby said, I am a printmaker. So the technical aspects of the work, it's always informing the final kind of product and the aesthetic presence of the ink on paper. In this particular show, I have some etchings on copper. So the technical aspects include applying grounds on the copper, using an etching needle, using ferric chloride to etch the copper, printing onto cotton paper through a traditional etching press. And I think each one of these stages informs the final product. In some of the other works in the show, I use photopolymer process. So I'm working with photographic methods, so like the exposure time and the exposure unit. This all definitely informs the work, and the technical process, it can definitely hinder the final piece in terms of the exposure getting ruined, the etching process getting ruined, and this happens a lot. And I think, there's only a small percentage of things that really work out, but the thing about printmaking and what I love is when it really works, it can raise the quality, which was a part of the question that I love to read. I mean, it really raises to a great level for me of an aesthetic quality where the ink just has a fabulous textural quality in terms of what I'm trying to get across. So it's a big part of my work, and hopefully, it's going to show through in a strong way, and not hinder it every time, but you have to fight through those things.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I'm sure many of our artists can. We have a lot of artists in this exhibition that have incredible processes involved in their work. And so what I loved about this question, and really what I love about this exhibit, is that everyone's approaching these concepts with completely different mediums and coming to the ideas with completely different processes to get there. So kind of on that note, I'd love to turn it over to Miss Liz Quan, who works in porcelain, and probably hits with some similar problems. So Liz, if you don't mind kind of picking up where Tony left off, we'd love to hear from you.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Well, I guess I'll start with the process. It's very organic. One of the first questions was I had to consider scale, because I tend to work smaller. And so for this show, I was like, okay, how do I make this work bigger or have a bigger presence? And I work with a lot of multiples. So I create a lot of these porcelain forms, and they become my tools, really. And so I've made different colors, and I've embroidered some of them on the edges, and I just kind of move them around and play with them compositionally on the table. And I introduce those wood panels as a way to scale and frame these pieces, because I have done these without any wood in the background, but it was just an opportunity to work with another medium. And so that became one of the technical challenges, is, okay, just scaling up and learning about wood. There's so much to know. I mean, my dad was a woodworker, so I understood a little bit of the challenges. But even to work that scale and also have the wood be flat, because wood is a very organic material. And then also staining the wood was another aspect to it. So it was really an opportunity to expand some skills in other mediums. What more can I say?
Perfect.
Yeah, it was just an organic. It's not like I had preconceived notions of what these pieces were going to look like. I was thinking a lot about nature during that time. And I mean, it was a really funky time to be thinking about any of this work during COVID. It was like,
Right.
It was very much a roller coaster of what is this about and why are we doing this? And I mean, it's such a highs and lows, but I think in the end it was very therapeutic also, to be able to just get lost in this work and be playful and just explore. They became like drawings to me. I mean, it was funny because it was kind of thinking like I was painting with these porcelain materials. If that makes sense. It was that was just a revelation of like, how do I approach this? And it was a very different way than I normally would approach my work.
I love to hear that, Liz, because I also feel like knowing some of your work, not all of your work, but I feel like these are so playful and have an element of whimsy to them. And I feel like a lot of that comes through with the wood shapes and how they seemingly kind of fly on the wall. And
Yeah.
so I feel like maybe because of COVID, you almost went the opposite way. You're like, I'm just going to have some fun and figure this
It
out.
was a little bit. It was. I mean, I think I was trying, I mean, we can get super deep about it all, but
Right?
I tend to be serious when I think about the work. I mean, no, I shouldn't even say that, because it's like I think I'm serious, but then my work is more playful. Like I like the work to be more tactile and more like invite the person, you know, the audience to interact and play and touch. So this was, I mean, I think the wood definitely introduced, I just wanted some whimsy. I didn't want to just do square forms because it seemed like it didn't really match the ceramic forms. So it was just kind of like, okay, throw it up and see what happens. And who knows? You just
Well,
never.
it worked out well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question, if that's okay.
Yeah, go ahead, Caprice. Yeah.
So they're so tactile. It just feels like you could. I want to touch them so much and move them, and I really love the embroidery aspect of it. And being a fiber artist originally, I just love seeing that element. I always love the mix of fiber and ceramic. I'm just, a real technical question is, how are you putting them on the board? Because I know ceramics are so hard to, you know.
They're just glued.
Okay.
No magic. They're just, you know, very meticulously glued on there.
Okay.
With like an epoxy, what are you using?
It's not an epoxy in the sense that I'm mixing, because I have used epoxies in the past, but they're just a mess. So it's called E1000. It's just
E1000.
super strong glue.
Cool. Well, it's seamlessly applied. Just like everything you do, Liz, it's like perfection. So we just have gotten incredible feedback from everyone that's seen all of your work, but people definitely want it. I have to make sure no one touches yours. There's some policing done back here.
I mean, it's up to you, but you know.
Yeah.
Normally
so speaking to kind of difficulties that come up while people are making the work, the next question is, what is the easiest part of making this work, and the biggest struggle in making this work? And so I would really love for Laura to speak to that. She does these incredibly layered, gorgeous paintings of cloudscapes and skyscapes, and they're so meticulously done. And I'm sure she comes across plenty of challenges in that process. So I'd love to hear from her.
Definitely. Easiest part is kind of echoing what Liz said, just being able to disconnect from our crazy world right now and just get immersed in it was like, honestly, incredible for me. It just was so nice and so stress relieving. And I'd say the hardest part was, I did all this work with like a newborn, so I was like so sleep deprived, and like I was like, I don't even know what I'm looking at this point. Like, yeah, but it felt so good at the same time to have this outlet with, you know, this world that had changed so much for me, like personally with a baby and with like everything externally going on. And yeah, so it was definitely a struggle, but just honestly, so needed for me to be able to just throw myself in my work and the details, and it was very meditative, and it just felt like therapy for me this the last few months to work on it. Just a breath of fresh air for sure. And I couldn't stop painting. I would get into it and I'd pull these late nights and just get immersed in those details, and I loved it. It was just so fun.
Well, I love how your work really mimics the process of making the work is as meditative as it is to look at. And I love when those two, the process and the result, really mirror each other. And that's something I feel like I use your work as an example to describe that a lot. So thank you for providing such meditative, beautiful work, all of you, for us to look at during such a challenging time. And I'm actually going to throw this question back to Liz again, who we just heard from, and I'd love to hear more about the challenges she faces with porcelain specifically, because I'm sure she runs into a lot of those.
Yeah, so the challenges actually wasn't so much with the porcelain, it was about the scale of the work. So, well, I guess in turn, the porcelain gets very heavy. And so I was really considering how to hang the work, because I didn't want to have like one giant 100-pound piece that I was like balancing, you know, to hang on the wall. So I figured out how to split some of those pieces in two so that they would puzzle nest together. So that was my big, head scratcher. Because then, of course, how do you hang them? How do you nest them together? And what kind of hanging mechanism? Is it a French cleat? Is it the whole thing? It was like, what? Wait, this is not what I want to be thinking about. And yet, it's such a major part of the work. Because it's those details, right? That in finishing it, you don't want to see how it's hung. That's secondary, and you just want it to just be not a thing. So
very architecturally seamless.
Yes.
What you've accomplished it.
Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. So kind of playing off of that as well, the next question is, what surprises, discoveries, or elements did you find making this body of work? And what would you like to expand upon? So that question I'm actually going to ask Caprice, Pierucci, which I think is kind of a perfect segue from what Liz was speaking about, because Caprice is a wood sculptor and deals with all the challenges that Liz faces now as well. So I'd love to have Caprice speak to the question and also anything about her process that she'd love to add in.
Okay, so I'm a self-taught woodworker, so every day is a surprise. A lot of what fuels the work is I'm working on something and one little thing will happen and then I'll be like, well, let's make that happen again. Or what if that happened and that got bigger? I'm not making like earth-shattering revelations. I just go from thing to thing that happens. And Liz, you were saying that the process is very organic, and mine is, it's just that. I don't have any plan. I mean, I have a plan. I know what I'm making size-wise, and I know how to get started, but I just start with the kind of the basic pieces. Like in the spiral there, I'll start with that first little ring in the middle, and then I work my way out. So it's all kind of cut, laminated. It's very processed. It's like, every day I try to break up the process, because you don't want to be grinding all day long. You want to be, thinking, planning, cutting when you're very alert during the beginning of the day, and then grinding, then putting things together, and then gluing up things for the next day. So I usually working on 2 or 3 things at the same time, so that it keeps going, and I'm spreading the work out to all these different elements. But it's very, very physical, and I'm kind of addicted a little bit. It's like an exercise junkie, but with a grinder, and to the process. And so that is, as I said, there's surprises and challenges. A lot ends up not going on the piece. I've just gotten to the point where I realize if something doesn't look right, I'm not going to go forward. It goes in I call it the bone pile, and I just throw it in the pile, and like, okay, I know from past experience, if this isn't exactly right, it's just going to bug me. So fortunately for me, all these parts can be regurgitated into other work. It'll be like, oh, okay, I'll just take this little piece, add something. And so, yeah, it's, as I said, you just start and then you keep going. So sometimes when I'm doing commissions, it's going to be 42 by 76. So I kind of know that, but sometimes it's hard to stop right at that moment. So I just kind of go with what looks good.
I love how much of your work is spontaneous, Caprice, because that boggles my mind to think that woodworking can be spontaneous. But somehow you manage to create something abstract and organic and spontaneous all at the same time. So that's why we love you.
Thank you.
So I also wanted to see if Kevin was willing to kind of answer this question as well. So I'll repeat it. What surprises, discoveries, or elements did you find while making this body of work? So Kevin's work are all made of shredded Polaroids. So Kevin, if you don't mind kind of speaking a little bit about that.
No, I'd love to. Yeah, I'd love to chime in.
Great.
Yeah, it's really, it's hard to even like remember how it started because, you know, I literally I'm taking dried Polaroids, which is kind of interesting and related to dried flowers. That's something I thought about that came up making this work, but I'll take dried Polaroids and, you know, when they come out of the Polaroid camera, it's that motion coming out that creates the image because there's a chemical packet that's, you know, squeezes the chemistry into that where the latent image was exposed that makes the image. So there's the creation. And I don't know even where this came from, but I was like, maybe I was making photocopies at work where I teach. There was a paper shredder and I was like, well, here's a bad Polaroid. Let me put it through the paper shredder. There was something about that, like it's the same parallel motion that creates it also destroys it. But of course I'm keeping them, you know, I'm keeping the pieces and then like joining two moments together. So that, like, I think there's kind of a, I want to call it an elegant violence, I guess, because when you look up close at these or you look at the prints, you know, that really serrated, jagged edge, it's pretty intense. Like, then you have these delicate flowers. So I really like that contrast. And you know, I've gone on to like cutting and burning them, not after when they're dried, but also when they're developing. And so I think I'm just playing with these different modes of destruction and like doing it while the image develops. And you know, so a lot of these like decisions are very, kind of goes back to one of your earlier questions, like what's the easiest part, what's the hardest part? I think sometimes like it's both in terms of making a spontaneous sort of instinctive gut decision can be hard, but once you've done a bunch of them, it comes easier. You know, you're just like, oh, maybe I'll try this. Maybe I'll, you know, I just put one of my Polaroids, I opened the top of it the other day and poured water in it and it's in the freezer. And I'm just going to see what it looks like when there's ice inside of it. I mean, I don't know, you know, it's just because I think of it as a container. So it's very random, but those are the kind of things that I love.
Well, and it also seems like at the end of the day too, you're playing with chemistry, you know, you're adding elements into it, and seeing how they react and seeing if it becomes artwork in the process. Or I guess it's all art. It's just whether you like it or not.
No, I think it's, you know, I mean, we all have sort of our lanes that we're playing in, so to speak. And like photography, I'm still very obsessed with, even though like I consider myself more of an artist than a photographer nowadays. But I still am obsessed with photographic light sensitive materials. And so it's kind of like, I know how Polaroid works. I sort of know the limitations of it in terms of exposure and color, but like what happens when I peel it open when it's still developing? What happens when I cut it when it's still developing? What happens when I burn it with the sun, which is the thing that helps us actually make images?
Right.
And so some of the ones that I've burned, I actually have to photograph them or scan them right when they're developing because there's sort of like this bluish color that happens. And then once they're developed, it goes away. So again, playing with this idea of time though.
Yeah. Well, they're just stunning. We're so excited to have this series here. And kind of on the flip side, on the flip side of photography, I'd love to turn it over to Laura, who is working with oil paint. And I'd love for her to speak a little bit about what kind of surprises and discoveries she finds in the process of creating her layered cloud paintings.
Well, mine are similar to all of you guys as well, as in terms of creating organically. So it is an intuitive process that I just kind of allow to flow and see where it wants to go as I'm in progress with it. And I really enjoyed playing around with new colors and new layering and I'd love to do more of that. It was fun to just not put any sort of expectations on myself and just see what comes out. Just let it be this totally emotional, intuitive process. And So I'm excited to try to play around with some new color palettes. Some of them are a little bit different. I think they were sort of subconsciously influenced by like the horrible wildfires we had this summer while I was working on them. Seeing those kind of like plumes of like the dark purple smoke kind of came into it. So it's just fun to expand upon that and see where it goes, and just let it continue to be this organic process.
It makes so much sense that you were inspired by the wildflowers, but I wouldn't have made that association on my own because they're so positive and meditative for me.
Right.
Or the fires. What did I say? Sorry, wildfires, not wildflowers. I was still thinking about Kevin. And what I also think is exciting about this body of work, Laura, is your colors and your layers, like the unique layers of colors that you're doing in this series seems like a branching off kind of new start for you. Would you say that that's true?
Yeah, definitely. And that's something I really want to continue with and just see where it goes and do even more of those sort of layers and bands of color, and maybe just do a lot more than what I have currently and play around with the new colors. Yeah, it's been really fun just let it flow and see what happens.
Oh, wonderful. So the next question I think is an interesting one. What things hold you back from making the work you'd like to make? So maybe you're envisioning something huge and you don't have the studio space or whatever that might be. We'd love to know. So Tony, I'd appreciate to hear from you about that question.
All right, all sorts of things are holding me back.
No. Well, maybe
No,
we
really.
can talk it through. We'll talk it out.
No, I'm kidding. Well, one thing I can say about myself, I am a professional musician as well, and I play fiddle and banjo and guitar in a string band in Durango, and have played for quite a while. And I think back in my early 20s, I was in some sort of art competition that, somebody had won, and I was thinking about, well, what if I devoted more time to my work? And I had this kind of epiphany, and somewhere in my head, I just told myself, well, you have to do both because they inform each other. And I've went forward with that. And especially with violin playing, later on in my mid to late 20s, I started playing violin and got interested in the different bowing patterns. And I found some books on stop motion photography, or they're called cyclographs of fiddle playing, and it follows the right hand in the process. And I was really stunned by the imagery because they were very abstract and fluid. I would think of fiddling as back and forth, but there are really a lot of subtle figure eight patterns and things like that. So I'm happy that I moved forward in a positive direction. I continue to have these two things that, maybe a long time ago, I thought, well, if I chose one, if I put all of my eggs in one basket, I could make a lot more of what I want to. But I'm happy for that decision. That was a big part of my life. And I'm also a college professor. So, I could say that holds me back from making some things that I want to. But in all honesty, I'm helping kids, achieve their goals, and it's fantastic to talk about, and it really makes me a better artist as well. So, yeah.
I'd love to insert a question both to you, Tony, and then to Kevin, and maybe Caprice as well. But if I remember correctly, all three of you are professors. And I'd love to have Caprice chime in and Kevin chime in about how teaching and being in the classroom regularly, or at least you at one point were, now on Zoom regularly, how your students inform your work.
They inform it all the time. I believe that art is creating is such a joyful process, and I get just even these lectures I've given 100 times, I get so excited at telling the students about certain trends in art and moments in art. And so I think that, you know, it gets me excited, it gets them excited. It's, you know, I feel like it's an honor to be there. Now, that doesn't mean I don't sometimes want to tear my hair out. It's you know, as I said, it's, you know, this is my passion. So I love to pass it on. And not every student is going to get it. But there's some that just amaze me.
What about you, Kevin?
That I would echo the same thing. I mean, I think, teaching has always inspired me because you know, as much as I have sort of learned through my process and my kind of career as an artist, they always come to things in really interesting ways that I would not foresee. And I love that. I feel like it's, you know, they're kind of like nipping at my heels, kind of, you know what I mean? Like I love that part of teaching. And I also feel like, I've been at this thing for a long time and I want to share what I've learned. It's a way to give back, and it's a way to, and one thing that I also really value is taking risks in my work. And I like to show my students that even somebody like me that has been in this photo world for 25 years, I still try to fail. Like I still try to make stuff that I haven't done before. And so to me, I try to set that as an example, like make a lot of bad stuff, you know, fail a lot, because that's how you get to the good stuff. So that's another thing that I value as a teacher.
Yeah, I like the idea is like, make your mistakes now, make them quicker.
Make, go.
Yeah, I agree with what Kevin was just saying about that. I mean, even with music, I'm constantly trying to think about playing a new instrument that I'm bad at, just to have that experience, you know, and see the connections between all the stringed instruments. It's interesting. I have that same kind of outlook, you know, to be bad at something, to continue your practice, you know, instead of just doing one thing that you're good at.
Yeah. Huh. Well, you guys are all inspiring me to get home and get back to the studio and fail a lot. So thank you. So I actually want to return to a question that Tony was asking previously and see if Liz is up for answering. Liz, this was actually one of your questions, and I'd love to hear about what holds you back from making the work that you'd like to make, or maybe that you envision, but you're not quite there yet.
I think that I just wish I had more people. I just need more hands. You know, because my work is so organic, and I like to play a lot in the studio, is I have a lot of little maquettes of different things, and some things lead to some things, and then I put it aside, and I'm like, well, you know, there's an idea, and it's like I don't have enough time and hands to really execute them the way I'd like to. So that would be one aspect, and the other is working with other mediums, you know, just having like a woodworker on hand and a metal person on hand, and you know, a CNC machine right there, and just like all the tools available. If you can just like, you know, have a giant compound with like everything available. I mean, of course, that's everybody's dream, is to have resources just right there.
Yeah, you can just start an artist commune.
Yeah.
Up in Boulder, everyone will come.
That would be great, you know?
Yeah.
But, you know, I mean, it's probably fairly common for all artists just to be able to, you know, work through things quicker, faster, more, you know, because it just takes time to make stuff. And particularly, you know, with labor intensive just materials.
Right.
It's like, oh my goodness, you know, that's the main challenge. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Also, you're so invested in porcelain and ceramic. It's not like all of a sudden you can pivot from that and invest in all these other materials. You know, porcelain's already an expensive investment to start with.
I mean, it is from a studio standpoint, but I think a lot about, I mean, I'm like, because I do like marrying it with other materials, especially wood and fiber. And, you know, I've done smaller things with fiber and ceramics, and maybe that is a way, you know, to work faster in some ways and it not all be clay. I mean, it's just different. It's not, you know, I'll work with any materials, you know, but really anything that I work with is still going to take time to flush it out. And
Right. To
Yeah.
even see if it will fail or not, you have to take the time to at least try it.
yeah, and just to see what it is, and it, you know, failing or not, I mean, it's just a matter of yeah.
Are there any other artists that would like to chime into that question? I feel like that's kind of a heftier one.
The elephant in the room is money.
Yeah. Oh, there you go.
You know, I can't live off of what I make teaching. And so I do have to, you know, supplement my income. So I'm constantly working on commissions, which I find something to get excited about with each commission, something that new I'm going to do or something I'm going to try. So for me, you know, I wish I could just be experimenting all day. And so I really enjoy, you know, having a show or something that's happening where I could, you know, I like to think at least one piece I'm trying something different and new. In this show, that vessel piece was, you know, I was trying to be looser. I've done vessel pieces before, but I actually, on that piece, was trying to make it do something different on the end, and it didn't, but I liked how it ended up anyway. But yeah, so I mean, it's a big balancing act of everything. And, you know, I enjoy the teaching as well. I only have to be at school 2 days a week. So it's a nice balance, but it is like, what if I could just do whatever I wanted all day long? I think I'd be, you know, pushing the boundaries a little bit more, not on such a time crunch to get stuff done.
Well, it's such a balancing act. I mean, all of you all are so busy with everything that you do and have a lot of commitments and responsibilities, and yet somehow find ways to be creative every day, whether that's just problem solving in your studio or actually coming up with brand new series. And kind of to that end, the next question that Caprice threw out there actually for the group is, where do your ideas start from and how do they evolve? So within these constraints that we all are finding and those struggles, ideas are born. So I'd love to have Kevin speak to that for a bit.
Okay, sure. I wrote out something really elegant, so I might have to read from it because I was like, there's no way I'm going to be able to come up with this off the top of my head.
We're all ears.
So no, I think I've definitely vacillated between I want to make work about the environment or this or that, but I think I've grooved into my art practice enough where like things just come out of making the work, right? And I think you hit on something and you figure out, okay, this is a tributary I should follow, and I'm just going to keep following it as long as I can. And then you have to, but I often will step back and say, I have very high standards for myself about where I see my work going in the future, you know, and so it's like, if I've made something that looks like someone else could have done it, I don't want to make it. There's no reason. So I want to make something that I haven't seen before, that I don't understand, or that I you know, I'm not familiar with before. So I think play is really important. Of course, we've talked about that. You know, in some ways I feel like with the instant film, I'm almost like a sculptor because I'm responding to the material. So I'm just going to read this because it'll sound better. Like a sculptor, the material asks you to approach it, and you come to meet it with some kind of intelligence and intention. So I really feel like you have to come at whatever material you're working with some level of like beginner's mind, right? Like, I have no idea, what is this? You know, how can I respond to this? Like, okay, there's plastic sheathing outside of this Polaroid. What can I do with that? Oh, so after I make these Polaroid mosaics, I lay them down, the light on them reflects onto the wall, and it makes these incredible reflections. Like, what can I do with that? You know, so I think it's always like looking even at what you're doing and maybe something you've done for a while, trying to come at it with fresh eyes and just be almost like an alien to it, like a foreigner. Like, what is this stuff? And I think that's where a lot of great stuff comes from.
Thank you, Kevin. I feel like that was beautifully put. Thank you for reading it. I also would love to see if Tony is free to answer this question as well, because Tony's work is extremely musical, and I'd love to hear more about the connection between his music and his imagery.
Yeah, definitely. And I was just thinking of this, but some of this could go back to like what hinders art making. Even when I was in school, you know, I was always in printmaking. There was a great lab I could work in. I was always obsessed about working up there every night, and I had to take these other classes as well, you know, so it kind of hindered my art practice at the time going through school. But the way I started looking at it was back then, you know, to really realize this subject and then bring it into my art practice. And in two specific classes of the history of American jazz, I took that class at the University of Nebraska, and then later on Native American literature. Both of the courses, I learned as much as I could about the subjects and went to all the lectures and tried to bring in the concepts to my work. And especially in the history of American jazz class, I mean, I took that into printmaking, and I started off with really kind of cheesy portraits of John Coltrane and Art Tatum, and went on. I was like discovering things about album covers, you know, being a 19-year-old going through this. I was making some graphic novels about Miles Davis and Charlie Parker. I think Charlie Parker kind of took Miles Davis in to live in an apartment in New York City, and making these narrative structures. And eventually I got to this point where I started drawing more to the music, and I kind of broke out of all these literal kind of figurative things and really got into the rhythm and improvisation. That was a huge epiphany, to use that phrase again from earlier. But at that point, I was really connecting to the music more in formal ways, like within improvisational instrumental jazz music. You know, it's a lot of negative space between notes, you know, textures, things like that, musical timbre, different notes playing together in the same time. And I've taken that, I still use some of the same line work from that experience, from that concept, and I've went on to play a number of musical instruments, and I find the connections back and forth. So I was talking about the stereocyclographs, you know, the fiddle bowing patterns and things like that I implement into my work. So yeah, those things are always working back and forth with content, and those musical ideas, you know, those become collaborative along with the materiality of printmaking, you know, the copper plate, which is very, very much like analytical, and, you know, printing in a strong, you know, a perfect kind of way, a professional way to pull a print where you get the full ink registering correctly. So I love that part of the work. Like the content is more of, you know, coming from music, putting that down, and that's kind of like more free form. But then the left side of my brain is a bit more analytical when I go into the print shop and actually have to pull the proofs, and I know exactly what I need to get from the plate or the matrix. So I love how those things can synergize when it's all working well together.
Do you feel like your printmaking informs your music as much as your music informs your printmaking?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say through the way I work, it's just kind of like, but yeah, with music, it's definitely both analytical and improvisational, because you have there's like intonation you have to get with the violin or fiddle, and then you're improvising as well. I think just the practice of doing printmaking probably helps with music.
Yeah.
I don't think about it that much, honestly, how that relates, but I know it's a very similar practice both ways. That's great. It's something
Well, it was interesting, Tony. We had a dancer come in that loved your work, and she wouldn't read your statement. She just wanted to look at the work and kind of devise her own concept. And she said it was inspired by music. She totally nailed it. I just thought you'd want to know that. That was a pretty cool experience to see her witnessing your work. She was so drawn to it. So I also wanted to toss that question over to Caprice. So where your ideas start from. I know you mentioned that you get to play a little bit more with commissions, and but I'd love to hear a little bit more about how, I know you have very specific series that you work through. How do you develop a new series, and where does that idea begin?
They just kind of grow out of what I'm thinking about. And, like right now with some of the curved pieces, I'm, thinking I want them to be bulkier, and it's kind of, okay, so how am I going to make the wood do that? And, it kind of just, I like to look at things like, I like the deteriorating, peeling paint, things that erode away. I get a lot of inspiration from natural forms. And so a lot of some of my earlier work were kind of shell forms and conch forms. And, it just evolves. And, sometimes you just get worried you're going to run out of ideas, but it just, I just always feel like there's the next thing that I want to make, and I'm not too sure how to make it. So it's kind of just boiling in the back of my head. And eventually, you make a stab at it. And a lot of times that's it. The first couple times you do it, it doesn't work. But as I said, I'm a fiber artist to begin with, and my mother was a weaver. So just all my imagery has always just been very linear and what I'm drawn to. So it could be, I was just at the Pottery Barn, and the bumpers on the loading dock where they erode away, I was like, oh my goodness, look at that. So it's just, it's inspiration's everywhere for me. How that gets from, what excites me visually, which is, I have a thing that they're called fiber happenings in the world. And I see a fiber happening, and, how does that then, I guess kind of when I was putting this question out there, like, how does that get from that to the next piece? It's just kind of mulling over it and maybe drawing it, and then, kind of taking a stab at it. And sometimes these things all come together at once too. So it's kind of a cyclical, as far as, I'm going in this direction, but that relates to that over there as well. So it's, and I talk to students about that too. How does something that you're looking at that inspires you, and then you draw it in your sketchbook, and then how does it become real in the world? And it might not be what you even started, thinking about. It's the process that makes it evolve.
Well, I love having these kinds of conversations, because I think what artists, one of the many things that artists bring to the world is they help everyone open their eyes to the beauty that's everywhere, and that inspiration's everywhere, like the loading dock at Pottery Barn. But something that I always see in your work, it's so fascinating that your mom was a weaver and you were a fiber artist, that if you expand like the knitting of a scarf, it would even look somewhat like your work. So it's always all connected, and like you said, inspiration's everywhere. Yeah. So kind of going from there to a little bit more of an existential question. This is going to be our last question from us, and then we'll launch into audience questions, which I think we have a couple. So this last question, in your opinion, what makes an artist successful? So I'd love to have Kevin jump into that first. I know it was his question and I'd like to hear from him about it. And I'd love for this to even just be more of a dialogue if you all want to jump in, but if necessary, I will call on you. So take it away, Kevin.
I was afraid I'd have to answer my own question. Yeah, I think it's, as I have a day job, I'm a parent, and I would love to at some point only have to make art. I think I'd still want to teach. Maybe I teach 3 classes per semester, so I'd love to just teach 1 class, and then I'd have a lot of time to make my work. I think that would be great. And so I guess that's one version of success, is like selling enough work all over the world and this and that. But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, I consider myself successful if I keep pushing myself into new territory. That makes me feel successful. Like, I'm not just staying in one place. I mean, you want to like make sure you kind of exhaust all the possibilities with where you are, but it's kind of like, it's like a band when they put out like an amazing album, they call it the sophomore slump, right? Where like the next album is maybe not as good. But then there's people like Radiohead who, like, every album they put out, you're just like, how did you even make an album that's better than the last one? Like, so I feel like that is successful as just being a creative person, is always pushing your own limits, and not sort of resting on your laurels or that kind of thing.
I was gonna say that I go out in my studio's in my backyard, and I go out there in the morning, and I'm thinking about what I'm gonna do that day, and it just makes me so happy. I think that it's just the joy, and so I do. With that said, I have art friends who, sometimes it's hard to work in a vacuum if you're not getting recognition. And, you make work because you're driven to make it. And, it is hard not to have an audience, but I'm like, you can find an audience anywhere. You can, push, go to work in a, cafe, restaurant, gallery setting, just, you can always create some kind of audience for the work. But, so I do have that in mind, that I'm lucky that I'm busy, and I can feel like that people are seeing it and it's getting out there. But I think the real thing is the joy.
Yeah, I'm just gonna chime in and tag on to that. Is for me, it's a lot of the questions as to why you're making the art, why are you doing it, which really leads to what makes it successful. And certainly, probably all of us, we all do it because of the joy that it brings us. And so that's the easy answer. We just, because we're doing it for ourselves, just for personal enjoyment. But I think when it gets tricky is when, we all, we want to do this all full time, and then it becomes a commodity in a way. And so then that shifts the intent. And, I'm really trying to, you want to hold on to that pure joy feeling and still be able to, make a living at it. So I think that, but if you can hold on to that, it will come. Like, I just feel like it, if you're really true to your work and really can hold on to that intent and the meaning that it brings for you, that will come out in your work and it will reveal itself. I just, that path will reveal itself. Because I think that initially you have to have that joy. I mean, people just can see whether there's, love in the work. I mean, and it's all, everybody, it touches all different people, of course, but most importantly is your own, what you bring to it, and then it will find an audience.
Laura, would you speak to this as well?
Yeah, I totally agree with what everyone has said so far. I think it's just as long as things are, authentic and true to you and your artistic vision, I think that's as big a success as you can have. For me, too, part of the success is when the viewer really gets something out of it, where they feel like, oh, these paintings made me just have this moment of calm and it meant a lot or whatever. Like, that's amazing to hear too. So I love when I can kind of communicate with the viewer, and that to me feels successful when they get something out of it. And maybe it's something I didn't see before, maybe it wasn't my intent, but I just love that it's this sort of other form of communication without words. It's its own way of communicating, and I think that's really cool.
I agree with that. I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's sold or not sold. I mean, if you're just reaching anybody with your work, to me, that's like amazing. I mean, that's like, what a gift to be able to have reached somebody or touch somebody in that way.
Definitely. I couldn't agree more. I love when I hear that too. Like, if that means more than a lot of times a sale, just somebody saying, wow, this really touched me and meant something to me. Like, that's just so amazing to have that connection.
Well, that's the joy that we get to see in the gallery every day, all the time. And we just want you all to know that it's happening here. And if you ever need some affirmation, we can tell you, just call. We'll give you all the affirmations. So I want to see if anybody, before our lovely Bobby Walker will wrap us up, I want to see if anyone has any specific questions for each other. Or I actually don't think I gave Tony a chance to answer that question. I'm so sorry, Tony. Do you want to speak to that question real quick?
Oh, I don't need to. I really agree with what everybody said.
Okay.
There were some
Great.
eloquent things there that I really enjoyed.
Beautiful. I'm sorry I forgot you.
Oh, that's okay.
So I want to make sure that everybody that had a chance to send us some questions has, or if you all have kind of any outstanding questions for each other, speak now or forever hold your peace. And if not, Bobby's gonna wrap us up here.
I have a question for Laura. How, with a newborn baby, are you finding the time to do that? And I just wanted to say that when my kids were young, I was making these pieces that were so obsessive compulsive, where I would just cut one little piece of wood over and over again and then put it all together. And it was because my brain, I had no time to be creative, so it was something mindless I could do. But yours is so involved and technical. So how are you doing it?
I was not sleeping. I was definitely not sleeping. But I honestly, was fun. It was nice to have something separate from just like taking care of a baby to do that was for me, and to just get lost in it was, I really enjoyed it. I had to like pull myself away, like, okay, it's time to see if the baby's okay. But yeah, it was definitely a nice outlet to have. But they feel OCD to me too, like very, very detailed and repetitive and all of that. But yeah, it was nice to have that kind of meditation and that just break from the everyday.
Anybody else? Okay, well, we've hit our 1 hour timeline. We're very excited about what came out tonight. It was just lovely to hear all of you speak. And I hope that you out there in the world have all been inspired by tonight's program as we have. I feel strongly that creativity is the key to moving us all forward in this new year. And that maybe through imagination and an open mind, we can create the change we want to see in this world. So our next opening is next Friday, the 15th. Sign up, come in and see us. Eliza's got a wonderful online viewing room that if you're out of state, you can always check out what we're doing from the artist studio, from the gallery, and messages from our collectors. So thanks for being a part of it, and have a good night. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.